Hello and welcome back to Steve and Dave's 50 Years Ago this month, in which we talk about the Billboard charts from 50 years ago, this time around April 1972. Steve, who's our headliner this month?
Yeah, number one in mid-April 72 is the great Roberta Flack with the incredible "The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face." Really one of the more amazing songs of this era. Dave, you got some thoughts about this?
Sure. This was written back in 1957 by the British political singer-songwriter Ewan MacColl. MacColl wrote this for his third wife while still married to his second wife.
Yeah.
And there are various accounts about how he came about writing this. Some say he had been dared because all of his songs were political. Somebody said, well, can't you just write a simple love song? And he said that he wrote it for a play that his third wife, or the woman that he was having an affair with at the time, Peggy Seeger, was in. So yeah, just depending on who you ask, I guess. But interestingly, this was covered quite extensively. All sorts of folk acts did it. The earliest recording of the song, which had been part of MacColl's act, traveling act, but the earliest recording was from Bonnie Dobson, and that was released in 1961 on her debut album, She's Like a Swallow and Other Folk Songs. Now, Dobson is a Canadian singer-songwriter who's primarily known for her song, Morning Dew, which itself has become something of a melancholy folk rock standard. And it's been covered by numerous folk acts, of course, as well as such artists as Lulu, Nazareth, Grateful Dead, Jeff Beck Group, Robert Plant, Long John Baldry, Devo, and the Einstürzen und Neubauten. So she was known for that primarily, but she's the first one to actually record this song. But other groups like Kingston, the song has also been First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, also been recorded by other folk legends like the Kingston Trio, Peter, Paul and Mary, the Chad Mitchell Trio, and in 1966 on his debut album, Lightfoot, Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah.
And MacColl hated all of them. He hated every cover. He used to have a special chamber in his record collection called the Chamber of Horrors for all the versions of this song that he just could not stand. He likened Elvis's version to Romeo being at the bottom of the post office tower singing up to Juliet. So the writer was never happy, but Roberta Flack gave this a kind of a new thing. She slowed it way down. This is much slower than the other versions, a more sensual version. And her producer said, well, if you're not interested in having a hit, I guess we can do it this way. And he was right. The first, she recorded this much earlier than it actually became a hit. This was from her album, First Take, her debut album. And it was twice as long as Seeger's version because it was just that much slower. Melancholy because she was feeling the loss of her cat. She had come back from Detroit, her first road trip, and found out that her cat had been hit by a car and killed 2 days earlier.
Yeah.
Which harkens back to last month, talking about Paul Simon's mother and child reunion.
Well, it does, yeah.
When he was thinking about his dog that had been killed by a car.
Well, yeah.
So I guess this sort of thing happens in recording circles.
Yeah.
But this was recorded in February 1969 and was not released until 1972.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And that happened because Clint Eastwood had been driving in his car, heard her version of the song on the radio, and he said he almost drove into a ditch. He was just so moved and so entranced by what he was hearing. So he wanted to use it in the first movie that he was going to direct, Play Misty for Me.
Yes, I could see that. Yeah.
So he called up Flack, and she says he just called her out of the blue at her Alexandria, Virginia home, and said, and this is now a quote of hers, "I'd like to use your song in this movie about a disc jockey with a lot of music in it. I'd use it in the only part of the movie where there's absolute love." I said, okay. We discussed the money. He said, anything else? And I said, I want to do it over again. It's too slow. He said, no, it's not. So he used it exactly as she had recorded it, the slow version. And because of his use of that in the film, the record company re-released it, and it became a hit. It became a huge hit.
It's amazing. Yeah.
This was the #1 Hot 100 single of the year for 1972. It won Grammys for Record of the Year, Song of the Year. So it was huge. And of course, this pretty much launched her career then.
No question. No question. Yeah.
This was, it blocked out Michael Jackson from the #1 slot because it was #1 on for 6 weeks on the Billboard Hot 100 and in the easy listening charts.
Right.
Had #4 at the R&B chart peak. This was played as the wake-up music to the astronauts aboard Apollo 17 on their last day in lunar orbit.
Wow.
Friday, December 15th, 1972.
Oh my gosh. How about that?
Yeah, all that stuff was going on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting song. Her version of it is the definitive one without question. In fact, she just makes that song so much her own that it's almost impossible to imagine other people performing it.
Yeah, I think so.
That the movie, that Clint Eastwood movie, Play Misty for Me, is a really interesting film. I think it's one of his most interesting films. It also stars the late Jessica Walter. It's Eastwood's always had. It's freaky.
It's a strange film.
It's a strange film, but it's so captivating because Clint Eastwood's always had this great affinity for jazz, and is featured prominently in the film. It's again, the backstory of these songs is always really compelling, and the fact that there's like this 3-year period between when she recorded it to when it actually then sort of hit the charts is just, man, that's really something. But that's tremendous. It's a tremendous song. Yeah. So so at #1 we have the massive hit, First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. At #2 then we have America's big hit, in a way, sort of a career-defining single, A Horse with No Name, which is we've talked about. You got a couple thoughts about Horse with No Name?
Well, it essentially put America on the charts, into the pop radar, and some radio stations wouldn't play it because of a supposed reference to heroin, horse heroin.
Yeah, it ran into trouble with that for sure. Yeah. And it is, I mean, the lyrics are psychedelic in some regard. They're certainly peculiar, and they did run into trouble with that. But it really never got any bigger for America than Horse with No Name.
It continues to be one of their biggest.
No question. That's right. So at #3, then we have the really important Joe Tex with I Gotcha. Joe Tex, who was a R&B and soul singer of some note in the 60s and 70s, in particular. I Gotcha is well. I confess, Dave, this is not a song. This is not a song that really immediately came to mind. You mentioned to me that this is something that you recall, that there's something
Yeah,
about this
yeah.
that just really stayed with you.
Well, it's funky. It's certainly unusual for a pop song.
Yeah, it's unusual for a pop song. That's for sure. I have to confess that my Joe Tex memory really goes then to his 1976 song. I ain't gonna bump no more with no big fat woman. That's the song that I remember from Joe Tex. But I Got You was a big hit for him. It peaked at #2 on the pop charts. It hit #1 on the R&B and soul charts. Tex was a born Joseph Arrington Jr. Joe Tex was really an important figure. He came up the hard way through talent contests and whatnot, winning talent contests, for example, at the Apollo Theater. He had, over the course of his career, a number of #1 hits on the R&B charts. He topped the R&B charts 4 times. I Got You was the B-side. And this has happened so often. Right? I Got You was the B-side to Mother's Prayer. That was supposedly the single. DJs, were a bit indifferent to Mother's Prayer, but they really were taken with Got You, and suddenly this song was the one that everybody was playing. Joe Tex's journey is a fascinating one. His personal kind of spiritual journey. He converted to Islam in 1966, and took the name Yusuf Aziz, and was a devout Muslim. And in fact, it's described that in his early years of after conversion, he was a kind of spiritual mentor to many people, and he was, he's a deep guy. Now his life kind of spun out of control in later years, but there's a lot to him that's really complex. I think that he is seen as again a kind of soul, kind of funky singer, almost with kind of some frivolous hits in a way. But there was a deeper side to Joe Tex that is really compelling. And so there we have it. At #3, we have Joe Tex's I Got You. At #4, we have that young lad from Gary, Indiana, who maybe at this point has he actually even moved to LA. I'm not sure, but we have at #4 then Michael Jackson's Rockin' Robin.
Right. This was also a considerably older song. It was written in 1958 by Leon Rene, under the pseudonym Jimmy Thomas, and originally recorded by Bobby Day in 1958. And it was his biggest hit single, coming in at #2 on the Billboard Hot 100, like Michael Jackson's song Will.
Yep.
And it actually spent 1 week at #1 in the R&B sales. So for the Bobby Day version, the music was provided by Wrecking Crew musicians, Plas Johnson on piccolo, Earl Palmer on drums, and Barney Kessel on guitar.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Thomas, or Leon Rene, was the producer of that version.
Okay.
But here we're talking, 14 years later, the producers now, or are now, Mel Larson and Jerry Marcelino, and the artist is Michael Jackson. This is on his debut solo album, Got to Be There, which was also the first single from the album, and also a huge hit.
Big hit, yeah, that's right. Huge.
So this got up to peaked at #2 and got no higher because it was being blocked by The First Time I Ever Saw Your Face by Roberta Flack. It got up to #2 on the soul singles chart as well. So it didn't even do quite as well as the original had done on the R&B charts. It was blocked there by In the Rain by the Dramatics.
Yep.
So it was a bad time to be trying to get to the top of charts, but obviously did very well, got its gold record. And this was just one of numerous solo hits for the young Michael Jackson.
Yeah, that's right.
He had a handful, never got quite as big as the Jackson 5 together until what, 10 years later.
Yeah, 10
And
years later, we get to the end of the decade, and
then
yeah,
he eclipsed everything, right?
exactly right. But it's this all part of the process of Michael sort of separating himself from the brothers, that he becomes he almost was starting to become a kind of Brandon of himself. And while that separation won't become full and distinct, I think, until the end of the decade, it's pretty clear who the real star is.
Right. And still with Motown at this point.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think one of the best things about this version of Rockin' Robin is the piccolo that you mentioned. It's fantastic. There's a
this song. It's just a kind of happy poppy song. So
for sure. So we have at number 4, then we have Michael Jackson's version of Rockin' Robin. At number 5, then we have Neil Young's Heart of Gold, the lead single from the album Harvest. This is Neil Young at his folky country-ish best, I think. It is a massive song for Young, I think, by any measure. It's his biggest single in the United States. It's in this period of his career, and we talked about this a little bit last month. It's in this period of his career where the folk and kind of countryside of Neil Young is sort of coming to the fore. There are, I think, real divisions amongst Neil Young fans in terms of, where all that fits in. And some people really appreciate this part of Neil Young's kind of style, and then other people are less enthralled with it. But Heart of Gold is it's a big song, and it is it's at number 5. You just mentioned the group a second ago. At number 6, we have the Dramatics with Within the Rain. And the Dramatics are, I think there's so much talent in Detroit. It's just kind of staggering, the number of artists that come out of Detroit in the late 50s and early 1960s. And not all of them, of course, end up with Motown. The Dramatics had, they had been a popular local vocal group in Detroit for much of the early 60s, before they eventually signed on with Stax out of Memphis. They had a number of lineup changes. I mean, I think it's always difficult to keep vocal groups together, and the Dramatics would be no different. There are a dozen different lineups of the Dramatics, and you look at their history. Even in their peak era, people were rotating in and out a bit. But this is their biggest song. This song peaked, of course, at number 1 on the soul charts, and it then climbed to number 5 on the pop charts. The other song of note, we talked about it last year. They did have a charting song in 1971, What You See Is What You Get, which hit number 9 on the pop charts. But past that, they really were not a huge factor on the charts. Nevertheless, they're, I think, really well remembered. I think that there's a lot of affection for the Dramatics. This particular song is, it starts off, with a kind of rain, kind of thunder sound. This sort of, we've heard that a dozen times. And of course, the song itself doesn't, break much new ground, as a man longs and for the relationship that's gone by, and doesn't want people to see him crying in the rain and all of this. There's all this kind of woe is me kind of deal happening. But it is a song, I think, that is well remembered. And it's surprising that, the absence of huge success that the Dramatics have had, but they are in fact a group that people have a great affection for, even a few decades after they hit the charts. Let's see. So there we go. It's got the Dramatics at number 6. Well, I'm sure you got a couple words about that. We talked about this young lad last week. Donny Osmond's at number 7 with Puppy Love.
When don't we talk about Donny Osmond?
What don't we? Yeah, exactly.
It's a phenomenon, similar to Michael Jackson. The young, good-looking kids, charismatic, fronting up a brothers group, incredibly successful, incredibly popular as a group, and then going their way as solo act. And Donny, if anything, was even out front ahead of Michael Jackson, which is hard to believe, but I think that's the case.
I think it's
if we're
right.
talking
Yes,
about April 1972.
that's right.
He's already had several really big hits by this point.
That's absolutely the case. So, like you're suggesting, if it's the early 1970s, you've got the Osmonds or Donny Osmond or both on the charts, and this month in 1972 is no exception. Before we get back to the songs, I would like us to take a look at the cover of Mad magazine from April of 1972. And I think it's, Mad magazine started in the 1950s, was an interesting kind of mirror of what was happening in the culture. It's a satirical magazine, primarily cartoons, a whole host of really great, frankly, great artists. Their parodies were oftentimes just really spot on. And what's kind of fascinating about Mad magazine, I think, is that it wasn't frivolous. That I think that oftentimes there was a kind of point of view that was significant. And what they were making fun of again or highlighting in April of 72 are the happy face
smiley
buttons.
faces. Yeah,
the smiley faces. So this smiley face thing was omnipresent, right? That people, the smiley face was on bumper stickers, shorts, buttons,
and came out of nowhere, right? I mean,
yeah.
it was just like it was just there. One day it wasn't, and the other day, the next, you saw them everywhere.
Yeah, and I, Dave, I wonder if there's something about just this was a reflection of the times, and maybe something what people needed. I mean, the 60s and into the early 70s was a very dark time. It was very dark. And there was just a lot of heaviness. And there was just something, I don't know if uplifting is the word, but it was a welcome diversion. And they just came from nowhere, like you're suggesting. And suddenly they were everywhere. And of course, Mad being Mad, you've got a little bit of Alfred E. Newman there on one of the buttons. But
isn't the smiley face really an expression of the "what me worry" philosophy?
Well, I think there's something to that. Yes, I mean it seems naive on some level, a little bit ignorant, but also I think quite welcome. It's easy to lose sight of this 50 years removed, but Vietnam's still raging. There's still the hangover of the assassinations of the 1960s. We've got, Kent State was and Jackson State were just a year or so earlier. And it's just, there's just a lot in the air still. And so I just think people needed a kind of break. It's a strange thing, but man, those buttons and those bumper stickers were everywhere.
Yeah, a sign of the times. I agree.
Sign of the times for sure. So let's go back to it. So at number 8, we've got the Stylistics featuring Russell Tompkins Jr. with Betcha by Golly Wow.
Yeah. This was written by Tom Bell and Linda Creed, and was produced by Tom Bell. Originally titled Keep Growing Strong, the Stylistics were not the first artists to cover the song, but earlier Connie Stevens had covered it in 1970.
Oh my God.
And the Stylistics version was released on February 17th, 1972. This was from their debut self-titled album, Stylistics, and it was their second gold disc from that album after You Are Everything.
Which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Philadelphia Soul, and yeah, they're coming out of the gate really hot here with their debut album. This peaked at number 3 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 chart, and it was ranked number 18 for 1972. Climbed as high as number 2 on the R&B chart. not a lot more to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so when we're thinking about soul music in the early 1970s, I mean, obviously Detroit, obviously Memphis, obviously Philadelphia. Tom Bell, he had his hand in everything. And that whole Philadelphia International thing happening was, I mean, it was powerful. And there were just a ton of music coming out of Philly at that time. And the Stylistics were one of many groups that he had a hand in. It's really amazing time for sure.
Yeah, I was listening to this in preparation for today, and my wife came by and said, "Oh man, that's just like almost sickeningly saccharine."
Oh, this song is. Yeah,
I like it. But I have a higher tolerance for that than a lot of people do. So
well, and I think, to be candid, I think that the Stylistic, this is not a kind of peak Stylistics effort. I mean, it really was, they sold a lot of records with it, but when you think about the Stylistics, you don't immediately go to Betcha by Golly Wow. Right. I'll tell you what, though, at number on the charts here at number 9, you've got the amazing Aretha Franklin, who at really the peak of her powers with Daydreaming. Yeah,
absolutely right. This is a song that she wrote. The song appeared on her album Young, Gifted, and Black.
Yeah, tremendous.
Peaked at on the Hot Soul Singles chart at number 5. No, I'm sorry, that peaked at number 5 on the Billboard chart.
Yeah.
Number 11 on the Easy Listening chart. And peaked at number 1 on the Hot Soul Singles chart for 2 weeks. She wrote this for the Temptations singer Dennis Edwards, who she was seeing at the time.
Oh.
And this would be her 12th number 1 soul single.
It's unbelievable.
While at Atlantic Records, and sold more than 1 million copies. It's been covered by everyone from Mary J. Blige and Natalie Cole to other soul artists, rappers, hip hoppers, R&B artists. It's incredibly influential and popular. So there you have it.
Yeah, there we go. Go ahead.
Donny Hathaway played electric piano on the song, and Hubert Laws played the flute.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The great Hubert Laws. The Donny Hathaway, we mentioned Roberta Flack earlier. They had a number of hits together. Donny Hathaway, of course, would pass away tragically young, but really an important artist in the early 70s. Okay, so here we go. So at number 10, we have yet another song from Sonny and Cher. It's Sonny and Cher have sort of 2 careers. They have a career making hits in the mid 60s. There is then this gap, and then they come back, roaring back in the early 1970s. And we talked over the months about a number of Sonny and Cher songs, as well as a number of Cher's singles. This at number 10, though, is The Cowboys' Work Is Never Done. And this will be a song that will peak at number 8 on the pop charts. And this is really sort of it for Sonny and Cher. This will be the last big single of notes. And
for the couple.
For the couple. Written by Sonny, it is well, I think it's not their finest effort, but it is, I think it's a measure of their fame. I mean, my take on this is that Sonny and Cher were, a household name. The Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour on CBS was still a fairly popular show. They were America's couple. They were on the covers of magazines and things like that all the time. And I just think that this is a function of that. I don't think it's a particularly effective song. I don't think it's particularly convincing performance, but it sold a lot of records. Had the names, I don't know, like Greg and Janet been on the cover, I don't think it has sold anything.
Did Snuff Garrett have his hand?
As always, Snuff Garrett is at the controls, and Snuff Garrett is the real constant whether you're talking about, Sonny and Cher early or Sonny and Cher late or Cher really throughout the 70s. Yeah, he definitely was there.
I'm guessing he was overruled on the choice of the song this time.
Well, that's hard to know. I don't know that for sure, but yeah, it's not their, I don't think it's their most effective number, but they're in this interesting time period. The Sonny and Cher show, the comedy hour, was, I looked this up a little bit. It was popular, but never really as popular as I might have guessed. In 1972, in the spring of 72, when this is all going down, they are the 27th most popular show in the United States. And while they would hit a little bit of a bump in the next year, that bump, I think, was largely associated with their marital discord. They famously separated in 1973 and then finally divorced in 1975. And I just think that so much of what surrounded Sonny and Cher was just the kind of the back and forth. I mean, they had their act basically was just kind of picking on each other. Again, this song doesn't.
In that period that you're talking about, between I Got You, Babe, and the beat goes on, and those early hits, and this period, no one wanted to know anything about Sonny and Cher. The people that went to their shows were not giving standing ovations. They were very lukewarm in terms of the audience response. And so their thing on the road was just kind of, I think, to get through it, kind of having fun with each other and kind of doing a bit of a vaudeville thing. And that became their shtick then.
That became their shtick. It's, again, if you take a look at any of these shows from the early 1970s, aside from the musical numbers, and then they had some cast players that would be there, but it's mostly just like back and forth. It's just sort of just short jokes and thin jokes and clothing jokes, and it's just man, I don't know. It's actually kind of painful. You have a memory of them, and then you see that, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. That's not so great. So at number 10, we have A Cowboy's Work Is Never Done. All right, let's cherry pick a little bit from the rest of the charts. At number 15, we have Three Dog Night with really one of my favorite songs of theirs, and that is Family of Man.
Well, right. We're both huge Three Dog Night fans from back in the day. And no surprise, this was another Paul Williams song. Paul Williams and Jack Conrad wrote this, produced by Richard Podolor, who produced a lot of Three Dog Night songs, but he worked with other people as well. Iron Butterfly, Alice Cooper, big names, and so he kept busy outside of just his work with Three Dog Night, but he stayed with them and produced for them until their very last album in 1983. This song was on Harmony, their 7th album, and was released in March 1972. It will peak at number 12 on the Hot 100, and this is a song that just kind of looks at what a lot of people were concerned about. What's the state of our civilization? Aren't we kind of running into a dead end? Time's running out for the family of man. So a bit pessimistic, but it really rocks nicely.
It does rock nicely, but I think you're right, Dave, that this is, it is examining sort of the world around us, and there's a certain bleakness to it. And I think that there is, it's hard not to have some sort of genuine concern about the direction of the world in 1972. I just think that it was a certain darkness, which is one of the things that makes the happy face button so odd. But this is, I think it's for my money, it's the best performance, arguably the best performance of the band, which is all Three Dog Night's band, which is always on the, never get much attention. And really, for my money, it's one of the best of their vocal performances. There's just something about this song that really comes together well. It's a fabulous number. At number 16, then we have this young lad named Jackson Browne, who is just becoming well known. This is from his first album, the Jackson Browne album, sometimes known as Saturate Before Using. And this is his single, Dr. My Eyes. Dr. My Eyes is, well, it's the bounciest song about like depression and burnout ever. It's, you know, there is, they talk about a kind of bleakness. There's a certain kind of darkness to this song as well, although it's the melody and all of that and the musical performances sort of belie that. It's, Browne was a precocious young person. He was born in Heidelberg in 48 to a GI dad, but moved and came of age in LA. He was a songwriter from early on, and he was pitching his songs to all sorts of artists at a very young age. He also was a pretty engaging person and played with a lot of people. For example, he played for a short time with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. He famously worked with Nico, the European artist who was also then kind of a part of the Velvet Underground. In fact, he was involved in a couple of recording sessions with Nico. Browne, though, was, I think it was pretty obvious to everybody that he was going to be a star. And he had that certain something. And David Geffen certainly realized that as well. And so he was one of the first people signed to Geffen's then new Asylum LP or Asylum label. And, you know, the Asylum label ended up, at least early on, being sort of who's who of up and comers. Geffen was a very engaging and a very ambitious man who was looking to create almost a kind of artist collective. And we've talked before about the importance of A&M records. I would think that the early years of Asylum would be on par with that there was a certain kind of artistic freedom, certain kind of experimentation, a certain kind of protection that Asylum, you know, provided. And people really wanted to be a part of it. Geffen famously kind of closed the door on all of that, and there were a lot of hurt feelings after a couple of years, but Browne was a big part of this. You know, this particular song, Browne has a lot of help, some great help, of course, the LA session community. That guitar, of which there are a couple really interesting power chords in this song, that guitar is played by the legendary Jesse Davis, who was a session guitarist. He was fabulous. On bass is Leland Sklar, who is still active. Leland Sklar, everybody would, the name might not mean anything to you, but the countenance would. Leland Sklar has this gigantic gray beard and hair, and we'll put this in the notes. Lee Sklar records something on YouTube each day, recounting various kinds of sessions in his lengthy career. It's like 10 or 15 minutes. It's fascinating stuff. He is super engaging. So I highly recommend it. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Also, we have, of course, the great Russ Kunkel on percussion. And background vocals. It doesn't get much better than this, than the one and only Graham Nash and of course David Crosby. And so there's just a lot here that really portends something really great.
And that's from a time period where he was wasn't he even rooming with
okay, Eagles? Yeah. So he lived below them, and so this is
talk about hearing him practice
right.
writing and stuff like that, like all hours of the day and night.
That's exactly it. He was a kind of model, I think, for a number of songwriters, including Don Henley and Glenn Frey. Those two guys lived above him, and Jackson Browne lived below them in a little, like almost a garage. And they talk about it in the Eagles documentary, right, how they could hear his tea kettle, and they could hear him play the same damn thing on the piano over and over again. But again, Glenn Frey famously talks about, oh yeah, it's elbow grease, right? And that's one of the things that I think became clear he worked hard. Jackson Browne worked hard. He was a real craftsman, and there was nothing left to chance with his albums. And this first album is really interesting, as are his albums really throughout the 70s. He's going to be a very big performer, and he's just becoming known to the world right now with Doctor My Eyes at number
Do I
16.
remember correctly? Didn't he write "Take It Easy" for the Eagles?
He contributed it too. Yeah, he and
Okay.
Fry contributed. Yeah, and so it's Glenn Fry who came up with the "Oh Lord." Look,
That's a
oh
girl,
God,
my Lord, standing
That's
on
it.
the corner of Winslow, Arizona. Girl, my Lord.
That's it.
Flatbed Ford. Yeah.
and that's apparently that's Fry's great contribution to that particular song. And so yeah, so to your point earlier though, Dave, yes, Jackson Browne and the Eagles spent a lot of time together. They really came up together. They played in the Troubadour, Doug Weston's club in Hollywood. Jackson Browne is actually on the Desperado album. He's actually part of he's photographed. Desperado album is kind of a concept album for the Eagles. They played Wild West, and Jackson Browne is one of the people who was, playing cowboy on it. Yeah, very close with that group in the early years for sure. Let's cherry pick some more. Man, at number 19 is Badfinger's Baby Blue, and Badfinger. There's a certain star-crossed element to Badfinger, largely because of the deaths of two of the members. And they famously, they had problems with record companies. They had problems with distribution and infighting within the band. But at their best, Badfinger was simply just amazing. I mean, I don't know that power pop ever got any better than Badfinger. And Baby Blue is I think it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
This is a single that's produced by Todd Rundgren. And again, Badfinger always had help from the best. This is a single.
Well, Rundgren took over for Harrison, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
The album and then had to leave because of Bangladesh. But
that's right. Yeah, and so they're always working with really the best people. They, of course, are famously part of the Apple family, one of the early signings on Apple, and the song is terrific. I mean, power pop at its greatest. The song peaks at number 14 on the pop charts, but this is kind of it for Badfinger. This is really the last single of note. The group will disintegrate in a couple of years, 1975, after the death of Pete Ham in April of 75. There is a certain kind of, there's bad juju that surrounds Badfinger. It's really, we've talked about this a little bit before. It's hard to sort of put your finger on it because they sold a lot of records. They were popular. They also had critical acclaim. They had a huge role in Nielsen they wrote, Without You, all that came from the Badfinger family. But I think there was always this sense amongst, particularly with Pete Ham, I think, that they should have been more. But they were amazing. They just were amazing. I don't know. So it's a great song. It's a sad story, but you have Badfinger at number 19, and we won't hear much more from them again, unfortunately. So I think the last thing we would like to talk about is, all right. So on the Mount Rushmore, I guess, of arena rock or hard rock or rock in general, this group's got to be on there. So this is Led Zeppelin with Rock and Roll.
Yeah, Rock and Roll. This, of course, from their fourth album, Led Zeppelin 4. I think you and I are in agreement that's our favorite album of theirs.
Oh, absolutely.
It certainly is of mine.
It is mine.
And I know people who say Led Zeppelin 4 is the best Led Zeppelin album. And I know people who say Led Zeppelin is the best rock group in the world. Those are always two discrete groups. There is no intersection as far as I can see.
I guess
the big Led Zeppelin fans, it's not that they dislike Led Zeppelin 4, but they talk about other albums when they're talking about the greatest Led Zeppelin albums. So
No
Be
question.
that as it may, this was basically the result, rock and roll, the result of a jam session at the Headley Grange mansion that they were renting in Hampshire, England. John Bonham just began playing the drum intro to Little Richard's song "Keep It Knockin'." Page came in with a Chuck Berry style guitar riff. The tapes were rolling. 15 minutes later, they had the basis of the song. A relatively fast tempo of 170 beats per minute. This is a fast song.
Relatively fast.
Yeah.
Frantic, almost, yes.
But yeah, it really rocks. Jimmy Page gets producer credits here. Recorded in 71, released February 21st, 1972. This includes a guest appearance by the Rolling Stones pianist, Ian Stewart. And the famous rock critic, Robert Christgau, called it, quote, simply the most dynamic hard rock song in music history, end quote. 2019, Rolling Stone ranked it as number 9 in its list of the 40 greatest Led Zeppelin songs. It's been a key component in their live performances, essentially since it came out. For a long time, it was the opening number, and then it became part of an encore. And finally, Cadillac bought the rights for a commercial. And it's the first commercial that use that the Led Zeppelin okayed. But it increased Cadillac sales by 16% in 2002. So I guess everybody's happy except maybe dyed-in-the-wool Led Zeppelin fans.
I guess, yeah. What an odd choice for commercial. Yeah, it's this is the song that it's the kind of calling card song for people who are getting into Zapp. I think that this is a song that is quite accessible. It, like you say, it really moves. There is a certain looseness to it that is it's infectious. It really, on that album, it really stands out. It really stands out. It's a fine number. They were never a big singles band, of course. They were monstrously popular around the world. They never sold many singles in the United States. They never got a lot of AM radio play. But
that was an FM band. The advent of FM radio made Led Zeppelin possible, and it made them. This was really the first gigantic group that did not build their reputation and their audience built on singles.
That's right.
And clearly, because of FM radio, it was possible to do that, and they just became huge. Obviously,
it did become huge. I think it's fair to say that it's the spring of 1972 that Led Zeppelin rules the world. Right. That in the music world, there's no band that's bigger. That this is an enormously consequential album. Their tours are massive. That they're just bigger than life, and they're also, as you're sort of suggesting here, they're becoming kind of the archetype for what rock and roll is, what rock and roll stars do, and how they look, and all of this. They're becoming iconic, and that I think is always a difficult transition. I mean, but they are definitely moving into icon status in 72.
Yeah,
so, there they are. So there we have it. So that's mid-April 1972. Lots of interesting things. We're headed, of course, to May, and May is a very, very interesting month on the charts, and we'll talk more about that. Also, we'll start to talk more in future episodes about, of course, this presidential election of 1972, where an upstart from South Dakota, a guy by the name George McGovern, somehow grabs hold of the Democratic nomination. Somehow, it's really quite an interesting set of stories there.
Yeah.
And then we'll be squaring off against the incumbent, a guy named Richard Nixon. So we'll be talking more about the election in future episodes. But Dave, you want to take us home for today?
Sure. If you enjoyed this episode, and we hope you did, you can subscribe to see some more stuff right here. Our last month's episode can be seen here, and our playlist, which you should absolutely take a look at. It's got
100%.
the great songs that we were talking about, can be seen right here.
That's right. And always remember that we have a reading list as well. And also we are on Twitter, Stephen Daves 1. We're on Twitter, and we're on Twitter every day. So thanks, and we'll see you next month.
Bye-bye.